Halito, and welcome to Native Chalk Talk, a podcast by natives for all. Here we're keeping our Native ancestors' stories and history alive, while also sharing with you our Native culture, traditions, and more. I'm Rachel Youngman, a Choctaw originally from Anadarko, Oklahoma. I hope you'll enjoy this journey with me as we learn from our Native American guests. And I hope you'll do me a favor. Feel free to like and share these episodes. I so appreciate it. Yakoki.
I wanted to serve my country, but I joined the National Guard at 17 years old, and I went to basic training in between my junior and senior year. About 3 years in, I volunteered to go to Afghanistan, and I learned a lot about the Mongolian culture. I learned a lot about the Afghan culture. That opened my eyes that there's so much difference in the world, and a lot of people, they've never seen, just the privilege that sometimes we may have.
See and share our stories at togetherwe'remore.com. In honor of Memorial Day this year, this episode is dedicated to our Native American veterans, our warriors who have served with honor, courage, and an unshakable commitment to protect this land and its people. Your sacrifice echoes the legacy of our ancestors, fierce defenders of home, heart, and heritage. To the veterans who have come before us and to those still who are with us today, Yakoki. Thank you. In addition, Father's Day is right around the corner. So, in this episode, I also want to take a moment to honor our men, our Choctaw brothers, fathers, uncles, and sons, especially those who have carried the warrior spirit through service, sacrifice, and strength. Now, this focus doesn't take away from the power and leadership and resilience of our women, who have always stood strong at the heart of our nation. But today, we're holding space for our men, past and present, to be seen, uplifted, and remembered. Okay, let's begin. Listeners, when you hear the word warrior, especially in the context of Native American history, do the Choctaw come to mind? Or do you picture the Comanche, the Kiowa, or other nations known for their battle legacies? If the Choctaw aren't the first you think of, I'm not here to judge, because honestly, I felt the same way. I grew up knowing that somewhere along the way, we laid down our weapons and became known for our strengths in farming, diplomacy, and business. But that's not the whole story, and it's time we talk about it. In order to do so, I've brought in an expert. For those of you who listen to Native Chalk Talk regularly, you'll remember my past guest, Ryan Spring, who talked to us about the Choctaw Light Horsemen. And if you haven't listened to that one yet, it's one of my favorites, and it's in season 3, episode 1. Ryan, welcome once again to Native Chalk Talk. Tell us about your role now at Choctaw Nation.
Sure. So I've been with the Historic Preservation Department since 2011, and I've had different roles over time. But one of the things I've always done is assisted with history and research with, Choctaw culture and Choctaw history. And here a couple years ago, I took that role as the cultural research associate. So that's what I get to do now full time. Beforehand, I used to do it. Oh, it's amazing. Like, it's so much fun. There's a lot, I have a huge list of stuff that I get a lot of requests, and I do them as best I can, but it's just a long list of different requests, but it's an amazing job, because you know that you're helping tribal members reconnect with history, family history, and coming from a family myself that's been disconnected, it's a great honor to be able to do this work.
I can only imagine. And so requests like that are coming from people like me. I'm always requesting information from you, and I've really appreciated that you're always good at getting back to me, and I know you're extremely busy. But are the requests coming from other people as well, such as someone writing an article, or does it come from non-native people as well?
Yeah, it comes from a lot of requests come from tribal members. We have some requests that come from non-natives that are either writing books or they're in school, looking for someone to take a look at what they're writing about. We get a lot of requests from the tribal government too, from Choctaw Nation.
Yeah.
And we get a few requests from other tribes every now and then.
Congratulations on your dream job.
The biggest thing we do is we author the Iti Fabasa articles, which are the history articles that are in the Biskinik newspaper.
That
And
makes sense.
so, yeah, and so one of the reasons we do that is because this is an old figure, but back in 2018, the Biskinik was going out to 185,000 tribal members. Out of our today, we have 230,000 tribal members. So if it's reaching that many, and even just if a small percentage of those read the Iti Fabasa, then that's our biggest way of reaching our tribal members.
For sure.
And so, so we have authored the Iti Fabasa since 2009, and we've never missed an issue. So,
That's great. And
yeah.
I love reading it. That's the part I go to first every time. I still receive the paper because I
Mhm.
like the paper. I want to open it up. Call me old. So people can go online to check it out, right?
They can. We've got the Iti Fabasa transferred from our old website to ChoctawNation.com. So
Great.
they're all on there, but they need a little bit of tweaking. So right now we're making sure all the photos are up to date, um, correcting any content that's changed since we've written them.
Well, you and I have talked about the topic of our Choctaw warriors more than once, and I've always had a lot of questions for you on that topic. Recently, I was visiting you, in fact, at the Choctaw Cultural Center, and I asked, I know the Choctaw more as farmers. Why do I know so little about them as warriors? When people think of the Choctaw, they often picture peaceful farmers growing corn and beans and squash in the soils of the Southeast where they came from. And yes, we were skilled farmers. Here's the part history books seem to overlook. We were also fierce warriors. So tell us what the word for warrior is in Choctaw.
Sure. So the word for warrior in Choctaw is Tvshka.
And that's
And
T with a V. Sometimes you see it with a U, but TVSHKA, correct?
yeah, it's T upsilon SHKA. So online we just use a V usually, but technically
Yeah,
it's an upsilon. That short A sound, Tvshka.
Tushka.
Mhm.
So let's step back in time to warfare traditions of old. How was Choctaw warfare structured before European contact, like tactics and weapons?
Mhm. So when we step back and we take a look at kind of like our war customs that we had, there's a couple things to understand in Choctaw society. So our society was divided into a duality. So we had the takers of life and the givers of life. So Choctaw women were known as the givers of life. Um, they were the ones that owned the property, they operated the households, they reared the children. They made sure that all the day-to-day affairs in the village proceeded, without issue. The elder clan women were the ones that would be over the village. They would make decisions, like if there was any like legal issues, they were the ones that made those decisions and carried those out. And they usually advised, the chief, the village chief, on, what was going on or what needed to happen, that sort of thing. On the other hand, you have Choctaw men, which were considered the takers of life. So while these roles are divided, they're usually tied to the sex as well. So the givers of life is usually tied to women. The takers of life is usually tied to men. And so there could be exceptions to that, but um, we don't see very many examples of those exceptions too much. But we know if our with our men, they were, they protected the community, they played stickball, they served as orators and historians, they did the heavy work. So a woman owned her house, but the men might come out and do the heavy work before the women and the rest of the family continued building the house. Before the women planted all the agricultural fields, the men might go out and help do some work first, and then the women would come out and plant later on. Um, but a big aspect to Choctaw life was Choctaw men as warriors. And that wasn't something that just automatically happened. So for a woman, throughout her lifetime, her status in the community changed. Um, and her social rank would change automatically sometimes. But with men, it was a little bit different. Men had to earn their place in Choctaw society. So when we look at our social structure, you have your Hatakamita, your young men at the very bottom of Choctaw society. And so if we had a council meeting, or if there was, a festival, or if there was ever input that was needed, they weren't allowed to speak. They weren't allowed to have a public, a formal public opinion. So, they could voice their opinion to their family members, and their family members with status could then, talk about that. But that next rank above the young men were the Tvshka, and those are the warriors. And so that's where you would see your warriors, your Tvshka, and your Tvshka Homa, your elite warriors. And then above them, um, you had your beloved men, your Hatak. And then above them, you had your chiefs, which would have been your village chief. The village chief usually had a servant chief that was usually his nephew. You'd have a war chief, and then throughout the early 1700s, we had squirrel chiefs as well. But
Did you say squirrel chiefs?
yes, the Faniminko, the squirrel chiefs, they're cool.
Oh, what was their role?
So imagine you have your community that you live in. So you have this Choctaw community. Well, you have relationships with all these other communities. And so let's say that your community has a relationship with this Choctaw community, or it could be a community from another tribe. It doesn't matter. So someone from your community was chosen as a representative to represent them. And that's what that squirrel chief was, is that he represented that community. So if the village is, talking about things and they're trying to make a decision, the Fani Minko would always try to keep in, hey, remember, if we do this, it's going to affect our community over here. And so they're trying to advocate for that community
Oh,
all the time.
it's
Yeah.
so structured.
Yeah.
And so the squirrel chief was kind of like public relations, right?
Yeah. And sometimes they weren't always well liked because,
Mm,
they're advocating for someone else within their own community. But it was
okay.
an important role. But by the 1800s, that role had gone out, and then had basically that became part of what the village chief did.
Wow. And you mentioned beloved.
Mhm.
What was that about?
The beloved men, the
Yeah.
Hatak Holotopa. Um, these were usually men that may have been elder warriors, but these were usually men that were wise and had knowledge. So usually they're elders, but not necessarily. Um,
Yeah.
but they were, if you had younger people, it's because they were someone that was well respected, or had some sort of innate ability or knowledge or something special about them. Like, for instance, in Choctaw society, they thought um, twins as being very special.
Mm,
And
okay.
so, yeah, if you have twins that grow up, they may get that status earlier than others. Um,
That's so interesting. They're like, two babies came out of you, woman.
yeah,
This is special.
yeah. And so, yeah, they respected that because they knew it was unique, and, they knew it was something special. Um,
How cool.
and sometimes we have a class. Um, they're called the Hopai, or the Hopai, and they're like a chief. They're like a beloved person, but they're also like a medicine person. There's no real English translation for them. The closest one is a prophet, but it's
Okay.
not that doesn't really define what they did. But like when you hear the creation story or the migration story of Chutta and Chicasa with the pole, the Hopai is the one that has the sacred pole, the Itifabasa, that brings it along the journey,
Ah, okay.
which is what our newspaper article is named after.
Nice way to
So
tie it all back
full circle.
together.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh-huh. Full
yeah,
circle.
yeah.
I love it.
So
We'll be back after this quick break. Are you in the medical field looking for your next opportunity? Listeners, I'm proud to introduce you to Native American veteran-owned staffing company, Worldwide Medical Staffing. Owner and CEO Jackson Weaver is a citizen of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma and is a service-connected disabled veteran where he and his team staff for commercial healthcare and government entities such as the Department of Defense, Department of Energy, and DHS, and specialize in staffing Indian Health and VA hospitals nationwide. Isn't it nice to know that our veterans are being cared for by staff who have been handpicked by a veteran who's been in the staffing business for 17 years? Healthcare job seekers, check out these open jobs on www.medical.com. If you're seeking temporary, long-term, or permanent placement of physicians, advanced practice, registered nurses, and more, check out www.medical.com. And Diakoki to our medical professionals and to those who have served our country.
You're asking about Warrior Society. And so there's a few things that, now that we kind of know the structure of how Choctaw Society was based, what's cool about Warrior Society is that Choctaw men, Choctaw warriors, to earn that status and to earn that rank, they had to prove themselves to their peers. So that may have been their uncles, that may have been friends of the family, but it's the other men that they're around that they interact with. And you think about the military today, right? You know, there's things in the military like boot camp that's made to kind of wean people out. It's to call, you know, people that aren't really up for it. And so if you're out and you're fighting, you want to know that the person next to you can trust. And so to become a Tvshka, that's that status that you had to earn. All the men around you had to trust that you had their back, that if they needed support, you were there. And so in that aspect, it's no different than, you know, our modern military today. You need to have those relationships and you need to have trust, you know, in your battle buddy.
Yeah.
So, but what this also meant is that in Choctaw society, a man could not get married until he was a Tvshka. So the young men could never marry.
Wow.
So what I think that means is that, you know, we recognized that if you have what it takes to be a warrior, that means you have what it takes to support a family. And, you know, I think that's a good ideal, and it's something that you know, we miss today. You know, we have a lot of broken families in Choctaw Nation, and I think having that standard for men of where they need to get to, I think that's something that maybe we could look back to help our young men today.
That's an interesting thought there, that we can look back to our old ways and realize there was wisdom there. And maybe if we pull from that, it can actually benefit the family structure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. And there's other little things that I'll talk about, but I want to get into some of the stories, and then I'll bring up some of these other things as we talk. I think they're kind of cool.
Yeah. So as we prepare for those stories, what kind of weapons did they typically use? I was reading about ball-headed war clubs, bows. What else?
So most Choctaw men, the simplest tool was a knife, and that was something they would use for hunting. It was like an all-purpose. It was a tool and a weapon. So it could have been a stone-bladed knife. It could have been a river cane knife. Later on, it could have been a metal knife, you know, once we started trading with Europeans. That was the basic implement that every warrior had.
Yeah.
War clubs were definitely like you're talking about, like the ball-headed war clubs are one type of war club. There's other types of tapina or war clubs that Choctaw men had. And over time, those transitioned into tomahawks once we started trading with the French for those metal heads.
Cool.
Yeah. Of course, the bow and arrow was a huge, the most important implement of Choctaw warriors for a long time. A lot of that was because, so at the end of by the 1690s, the English started trading guns to the Muskogee and the Chickasaw. But Choctaws were allied with the French, and the French could not get us as many guns as the English could supply. So what would happen is usually a chief would have up to 8 guns, and he would loan those out to his warriors. And so not every Choctaw man had a gun. The village had a small collection of guns that they would use for warfare or for hunting, that sort of thing. But the bow was the main implement until after the French period. So after around 1763, 1765 is when Choctaw men start getting easier access to guns and weapons. The bow was the main implement of a hunter and a warrior for a long time for Choctaws.
And so I assume they had arrowheads.
Yeah. And there's lots of different types of arrow points. I think depending on what you're using your arrow for, it also depends on if maybe your clan had a specialty on what types of arrow tips it used. We don't really know, but there's different things you have access to. So most Choctaw men are going to, use what they like or use what they have easy access to. So the most common point is a flint napped arrow point. It's a small little thing, and it attaches on a wood or like a river cane arrow. And turkey feathers were the best fletching that we had access to.
Yeah, because we were mostly in Mississippi, Alabama,
Mhm, mhm.
Arkansas, Louisiana, I think.
Yeah, those areas. So turkey feathers are really the best in North America for fletching. Um,
Hmm.
so and they're turkeys are hard to hunt. So what a lot of men would do is if they were really skilled turkey hunters, they would have turkey feathers in their hair. And so feathers were usually used to show um, kind of what someone was good at. So if they were good turkey hunters, they would have turkey feathers in their hair, or if they were in a position of leadership, they might have eagle feathers or hawk feathers in their hair, depending on if they had a role in medicine or kind of a smaller leadership role. They might have crane feathers or other types of white feathers. And then medicine people had different owl feathers depending on what type of medicine that they specialized in.
I like how the different feathers signified their role in the tribe and kind of their rank as well, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so Choctaw people, immediately when you looked at a Choctaw man, you knew he was Choctaw because if his hair was long on the right side, um, depending on what he was wearing as well.
Hmm.
Early on in the 1700s, we practiced head flattening. So when there would be a baby boy, they would take like a little bag of sand and they'd put it on his forehead, and their forehead would be flat and like elongated.
I
It's
never
like,
knew this.
oh, they call it cranial deformation. That's like the fancy term for it. But yeah, it's
What?
Choctaw head flattening. And so it was really popular up until the early 1700s. So
That was definitely a way that other tribes could know who they were dealing with.
yeah, exactly. Like if you saw someone with a flattened head, you knew that they were Choctaw. So
Was it for
that's
boys
why,
and girls?
no, just boys.
Just boys. Okay.
Yeah. So that's why in the Southeast, if you encountered a male with long hair, you knew they were Choctaw. Or if they had a flattened head, you knew they were Choctaw. And that's why the other tribes called us either the Panchifalaya, the long hairs, or they called us the flatheads. So,
You just produced a really cool fun fact for all of us. Thank you.
mhm. So talking about the different tools they had. So the Choctaw bow was adopted around 800 AD. So it hasn't been around that long um, in the long scheme of things, but
Yeah.
it's definitely been used for a long time. And so we're talking about arrow points. So there's different ones you can have depending on what you're hunting, right? So if you're hunting small game like a squirrel in a tree, you want to have a flat tipped arrow. So it hits it and it stuns them. Or if you hit them in the head, it will kill them and they'll fall out of the tree. Because if you
Yeah.
use a sharp point and it pierces through, it's going to stick them to the tree and then you have to climb the tree. I guess that's why you take your kids hunting so they can climb the tree. Um,
Makes sense.
yeah, so you have these flat tipped arrows. And then you have your normal projectile points. So those were usually made out of stone. So those were all flint knapped into small little arrow points. Sometimes garfish scales were used. So those are really cool. Have you ever seen a garfish before?
Yes.
They're a super old fish and their scales get really, really hard. And so you can use certain scales on the garfish as arrow points. There's also a type of arrow that's used for fishing. It's like a fishing point. It's like a kind of gauged. And so you shoot the fish and then you can pull it out. And so,
So cool.
yeah.
Isn't there some historical item that is in France at one of the museums that has a garfish? It holds the
Yeah.
arrows or something like that.
Yeah. So that was one of the cool things that we got to see that came over here in the last um, changing exhibit at the Cultural Center. It was a quiver that was made from a garfish.
So
And
cool.
yeah, and it was for blowgun darts, which
We also
was,
use blowgun darts.
yeah, we use blowguns. So Choctaw blowguns, um, they were anywhere between 6 to 8 feet long. So they're pretty long and, they have a decent diameter that you have to blow through. And so, you had to have good lung capacity to be able to shoot with blowguns. But
Yeah.
blowguns were one of the first tools that boys would learn to hunt with, besides rabbit
Okay.
sticks. So,
So
yeah.
back to the quiver, though, the fact that it's
Mhm.
lasted this long.
Yeah. They made it 2 French revolutions. It's quite,
Dang.
yeah,
Wow.
that quiver is really neat because it's not 2 pieces, it's one garfish piece. And so that's what we were trying to look at. We were looking at other artisans of how do you do this without splitting it?
Yeah.
It's not split and stitched, it's one piece. And talking to different artists, they have some ideas on how to do it. So we have 2 or 3 artists right now that are kind of working on it to try to see if they can
How neat.
recreate it. Yeah. When Choctaws fought Hernando de Soto in 1540, we were still using atlatls, which we call unshakable, but it's basically it's a big throwing dart that's, it's pretty big. It's, 4 to 5 feet long dart. And then you have this atlatl the atlatl is actually the piece that you throw from. And so you
Okay.
hold it on your arm, you hold it in your hand, and when you throw it, it's like doubling how long your arm is. So it adds more velocity and force to it. So
Yeah.
these atlatls, they were invented back thousands of years ago to hunt Pleistocene megafauna, basically all these giant animals that we used to have, like the mammoths, the giant armadillos, all that kind of stuff that used to be around. So that's what they were really good at, is hunting that kind of thing. And so when people find arrowheads that are like bigger, those are actually atlatl points. They're not arrowheads
Oh
because
my
arrowheads are
gosh.
actually really tiny. So they're projectile points. Yeah, and the atlatls are cool because they can like go clean through a car door. Like because they were meant
Dang.
to put all that force into one little point. So
Yeah.
that's what we hunted mammoths with. Like,
Amazing.
yeah, there's mammoth kill sites that show these projectile points in there. And we have an oral history that talks about Choctaws, um, about how the Black Belt Prairie in Mississippi and Alabama was created by mammoths, and that there was
Mm.
this battle between the last 2 of its kind. So,
So obviously
yeah.
they've found the remains.
Mhm. I mean, they found kill sites archaeologically. We find different
Yeah.
Clovis kill sites with those points embedded in them. So,
Way cool.
yeah, I mean, we know our history goes back to time immemorial, but what's cool is archaeologically this shows that our Choctaw histories at least go back 12,000 years.
Right.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this series.
Thanks for listening to Native Chalk Talk. Be sure to join our community on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and check us out at nativechalktalk.com. Stay tuned for the next episode. You're going to love it. Yakoki. Thank you, my friends.